The National Electrical Code, specifically the 2002 edition, mandates ground fault circuit interrupter, or GFCI, protection for all 125-volt, 15-amp and 20-amp receptacles installed in crawl spaces. This requirement extends to receptacles that are integrated into lighting fixtures. The primary reason for this regulation is to enhance safety and minimize the risk of electrical shock in damp or potentially wet environments like crawl spaces. There is an exception to the GFCI requirement, and that is for receptacles that are not readily accessible. However, if the receptacles in the crawl space can be accessed, even if it requires a ladder or tool, they must be GFCI protected. The code uses the term readily accessible to refer to something that can be reached quickly without obstacles or the need for tools or devices to remove an obstacle. Now, addressing how to implement GFCI protection in a crawl space circuit. Firstly, install a GFCI receptacle at the beginning of the circuit right after the branch circuit originates from the main panel. This placement ensures that all downstream receptacles on the circuit, including the one dedicated to the sump pump, are protected. Secondly, consider installing a GFCI circuit breaker in the main panel. This approach provides protection for the entire circuit, but typically involves a higher cost compared to installing a single GFCI receptacle. There are pros and cons to each approach. The advantage of a GFCI receptacle is lower cost. The disadvantage is that it might be more difficult to access for testing and resetting. The advantage of a GFCI circuit breaker is that it may be easier to access, but the disadvantage is higher cost. It is important to note that the National Electrical Code changes over time. Always refer to the latest edition of the NEC and consult with a qualified electrician to ensure compliance with local regulations. The information provided here is based on the 2002 edition of the NEC. If the sump pump receptacle is GFCI protected, there is the potential for nuisance tripping, which could lead to the sump pump not operating when needed. In order to mitigate this concern, one could use a GFCI receptacle or breaker that has improved immunity to nuisance tripping, or utilize an isolation transformer to prevent the ground fault from occurring in the first place.